I'm a 25-year-old male. I live in Utah, and I'm curious if any of you have seen anything like this before. I'm pretty sure I saw a wendigo or a skinwalker. I know it sounds strange or crazy. I don't really believe in those things, and I'm regularly skeptical when it comes to the paranormal. This happened to me when I was 17 and in high school, and living with my parents. My house at the time was in a very small town. The backyard faced open, empty fields and mountains for miles before you reached another civilization at all. My best friend lived next door, and we shared this field as our backyard in a way. I have to explain. His house was built on a different street that ended in the field with a small cul-de-sac. I think there were supposed to be more houses built down the street to expand the town, but they clearly never got around to it. So his driveway was basically in this cul-de-sac, even though no other houses were built there. This matters later in the story. I used to stay the night at my friend's house a lot in high school, because I didn't have the best relationship with my own parents. Every once in a while we would wake up to hear dragging and a weird gargling sound from the back porch. His room was a basement room, with the window well to the back porch. It would happen maybe a couple times a month, but whenever we would gather the courage to check, nothing would be back there. This happened for years. One night haunts my friend and I to this day. He was getting ready to move, and we would stay up all night playing games and watching movies. We decided to go on a music drive just to vibe, so we hopped in his truck with high beams and swung out of the driveway, turning them on towards the field to use the roundabout. The light illuminated this thing. It looked like a person, but it wasn't. It was naked on all fours, abnormally large, particularly its limbs that seemed to fold under itself in an unnatural way. Its pale skin clung to it like it had to be stretched onto it, but the part that still sends shivers down my spine was its face. Its jaw hung open to this black gaping maw, like a snake unhinging its jaw to eat. Its black eyes glistened in the light as it looked at us, but just as it turned to see us, it quickly scurried backwards, almost like it was on rewind into the brush of the field. My friends and I were pale as ghosts. We both looked at each other like, "Did you see that too?" We were shaken. Let's just say we tried to have a good rest of the night, but we couldn't believe what we saw. We ended up just sitting there in the basement with guns ready, waiting to hear the gargling and dragging again. But we never did. I know that's not very climactic, but it's the truth. I don't live in that town anymore. There are times when I visit there, though. That empty field still feels like it's watching and waiting. Even though I can't see it, I can still feel that it's out there. This happened when I was about 15 in a little town called St. Helens, just outside of Portland, Oregon. At the time, our family was really going through some tough obstacles. My dad had been acting very strange, talking to himself, and not acting as he normally did for a couple days. His personality would change quite often. At the time, he was not diagnosed with schizophrenia, and we were trying to get him help. Leading up to the night I had seen this thing conversing with my dad, I had also experienced very strange dreams, and it felt like I had been sat on by someone very heavy. I looked and no one was there. My brother had seen something he called the garbage man on numerous occasions. He said it looked like a bag was over his head and was being sucked into his mouth in eye sockets. It leaned over him and appeared to be very tall. This thing visited him a few times. It was about 2 a.m. and I heard my dad talking to someone or himself. At this point, I had a routine of going and talking with him to calm him. My bedroom had been right next to the kitchen and the bathroom because it was a small house. I walk into the kitchen, which had been brightly lit by the outside lights. First thing I see is the very tall shadow figure in the doorway of the bathroom, and my dad standing toe-to-toe with this massive thing. He's mumbling something, then he says loudly, "Leave me alone!" I'm terrified, so I ran right back into my room. My dad's mental state took a turn. It was a struggle for my family to get him help. Eventually, things escalated, and my dad was considered a danger to himself and others, and was able to get the help he deserved. They did not find drugs in his system, and eventually diagnosed him with schizophrenia. I don't know why we saw this thing or what it was. I think it was preying on my dad's weakness. Can people with this mental illness see past the curtains? Since this day, that question runs through my head a lot. An old friend of mine hit me up. I started reminiscing and remembered this. I believe I encountered the black-eyed children over a decade ago in rural Appalachia. This has always low-key disturbed me. Keeping in touch to this day, we've never brought it up. We were at a local/state park sort of place, between 9 p.m. and 1 a.m. I remember we were parked alongside the woods and some picnic tables. It was pretty desolate. We were technically trespassing, 17-year-old female and 17-year-old male at the time, and what we were doing there you can leave to your imagination. As our curfews were approaching and we were finishing up our time together, we experienced a very ominous feeling. He was in the driver's seat, preparing to start the car and pull off. The car doesn't start. We sort of laughed it off as it wasn't the first time, and talked. Suddenly, to the right, the passenger side where I was sitting, we see faint lights coming out of the woods. The ominous feeling intensified. Emerging from the woods, there are 4 to 5 children, younger than us, like appearing to be 7 to 11 years old. I'm not going to claim they had black eyes. It was dark, and I was pretty shook. I didn't read about the black-eyed children lore until years later, which described everything else that we had experienced. All I can say is they were not normal. They did not belong. The cabins at the park weren't even occupied. They weren't getting rented out as it was winter. We were miles from the park's hotel. There were no adults. They were absolutely out of place. What were the lights? I don't know. But the closest thing I can compare them to are glow sticks. As if they had opened a package of those novelty glow sticks that include bracelets, necklaces, or wands. But it wasn't like they were having fun or goofing off. They just stopped, stood there, and stared at us. He tried asking what they were doing here, if they were lost, where are their parents? No response. The oldest-looking male child, a bit heavy-set with a gray hoodie on, approached the vehicle just in the front where the passenger headlight would be. My friend started really freaking out at this moment. He locked the doors and was like, "Hell no, we gotta go." And eventually the car started. The children don't move, and the kid stays put in front of the car. My friend eventually yells to the kid that he's gonna run him over, and the boy slowly backs away, raises his arm, and points at us as we were leaving. I didn't look back. Hello. I've been putting off writing this for a while now because some people I told were horrified to be close to me afterwards. I was in my freshman year of college. I wasn't doing well mentally. A lot of thoughts jumping in my mind. My room was fairly sized. I had one roommate and we were doing fine. Halfway through the winter semester, I got horrible feelings of anxiety in this room. If I went to my friend's room, it would be fine, but I always felt like something was watching me in mine. My roommate also started to feel this way. She would constantly be getting sleep paralysis and horrid dreams. She finally had enough and started sleeping in her boyfriend's. So, I was alone. Everything was gloomy. I had to sleep with some lights on because I just felt like someone was there. About 2 days later, my roommate's still not there. I go to bed, and I hear breathing. It wasn't close to me, but I could still hear it. I was facing my roommate's bed. Behind me was a brick wall. I open my eyes, and I see this black figure laying down on her bed. I silently freaked out, but tried to stay still, and kept watching. And when I did, it sat up. It looked at me, and had burgundy red eyes, and like a black mist emitting from its body. I hated that. I immediately turned to the brick wall, and started saying some mantras, not my first spirit, and covered my face with the blankets. When I thought it was going to be okay, I stopped, and all of a sudden, I felt something right near me, and it whispered in my ear, "If you sleep tonight, I will kill you." I was terrified. I tried not to sleep, but eventually I passed out. And oh boy, the dream I had that night was weird. Basically, I was in a desert with these people sitting in a circle, and in the middle was the dark figure. They started chanting, and I was scared to say anything. I had no idea what was being said, but the leader was yelling at me to chant with them. But it was too late, and the dark figure stabbed me in the heart, and I just laid there, until this blue fire rose around me, and these circles with lines on the sides appeared all over my body. And I started chanting, and the dark figure died, I think. I woke up falling out of bed and clutched my chest, because it felt like something did stab me, but there was no blood, no open wounds. I never saw that spirit again after that. I called my RA, and she said last year some girls had the same experience with a dark figure with red eyes. They ended up blessing the room after the semester was over. Definitely freaky. Hated every second of it. My girlfriend and I like to use recreational drugs sometimes. They're called research chemicals. On Friday, July 29th, 2022, we used some uppers. The ones we used give you a rush and energy, but have no psychedelic or hallucination-inducing effects. Had a great time and slept it off the next day, both of us waking up late in the afternoon. We had a good breakfast and Netflix and chilled for a while. She lives in a studio apartment and has pet rats, so we can't smoke inside, because they have sensitive lungs. The building she lives in has a public balcony, so that's where we went out to smoke about every hour or so. It was a small balcony on the second level, with wood railings and a stone floor, overlooking the neighborhood. The building's rule was that no one was allowed on the balcony after 10 p.m. We didn't really give a fuck about that rule, and neither did anybody else, so we'd smoke there in the evenings too. It was on Saturday night, July 30th, that we went for a smoke outside again. Must have been midnight. We were reminiscing about the day before. About halfway through our cigarettes, I suddenly heard a weird noise very far in the background. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, and since we were having a conversation, I tried to ignore it. It stopped after a couple of seconds. I noticed it stopped, but paid no mind. When our cigarettes were done, we were still just standing on the balcony talking, when I suddenly heard the sound again, and immediately asked my girlfriend to be quiet. "Why?" she asked. I responded with, "Shh." I was listening to what that sound was. After a few seconds, I realized what I was hearing, and I felt a cold chill running down my spine, like my soul got sucked down through the floor. My whole face went pale. "I hear women screaming," I said. She laughed at first, and jokingly asked if I was high on something. I told her to shut up for a second and really listen. She noticed how dead serious I was, and she turned her ear towards the end of the balcony, and as she heard it, I saw her face turn just as pale. "That is a woman screaming," she said. Our first thoughts were that somehow we had taken some really bad drugs, and had some kind of weird shared psychosis after effect. We immediately checked if we had any symptoms of overdosing or after effects. No sweats, no high heart rate, no fatigue, no crazy thoughts. Both of us were able to think and talk clearly. We concluded that the sound we were hearing, a woman screaming, was real. The reason this struck us so much was because it wasn't a normal kind of scream. It wasn't somebody getting scared or mugged or whatever. This scream was different. It echoed. It carried a hopelessness in its tone. It sounded so vague and far away, like it was carried to us by the winds. The scream sounded like somebody screamed their soul out of their body and into the sky. Both of us nailed to the floor, we kept listening in silence. Some loud-ass teenagers were cycling home, probably from a bar or something, and screaming at each other. Both of us could finally breathe again. "Well, that was the logical conclusion. Just some loud teenagers," she said. I initially agreed, but when they were far beyond what we could hear, the screams came back again, their sound even more desperate now. I called emergency services. I explained to them what we had heard and how it had affected us. They told us they're sending a police car over. We were outside in the parking lot near the main entrance waiting for them, still hearing these faraway screams. The police arrived at 1:45. 2 officers, a male and a female, introduced themselves and asked us to explain in detail what we experienced. So we told them exactly what we heard and where we heard it from. The male officer didn't take it too seriously and tried to ease out of it by saying it was probably just mating frogs. Apparently, they make a scream-like sound when mating. The female officer took us more serious and stood with us listening. And very faintly, like whoever was screaming was running out of energy and time, we heard her again. So did the female officer. She immediately contacted the station, and they set out a search and rescue. We were thanked for reporting this, and they left. For me, it wasn't done yet, though. We sat back down on the balcony and kept listening. As we were sitting there, the night sky turned a pulsating blue from all the police cars driving around trying to find this screaming woman. We sat there just listening to the continued screaming, hoping it would stop when they found her. Must have been about 20 minutes later, almost 1:30, that the screams finally stopped. My hopes were that the police had found her and she was safe, but deep down, I had a feeling that she wasn't. That Wednesday, I was at my mother's house for dinner. She lives in the same town as me. During dinner, I told her what we had experienced and how frightening it all was. My mother stood up without saying a word, walked over to the living room, grabbed that day's paper and handed it over to me. "Woman found dead under fallen tree," the headline read. I was shocked. I felt my eyes filling up with tears and said with a shaky voice, "I heard this woman die." Against my better judgment, I kept reading. The 47-year-old woman was on a midnight walk in the woods last Saturday night when a tree fell over and crushed her legs. Local authorities believe the woman may have survived for several hours before succumbing to her injuries. She had been dead for almost 72 hours before she was found. The police refused to share further details as to her identity or passing. There was more in the article, but I could not and refused to read it through my tears. I did not have it in me to share this with my girlfriend, out of fear of how she would take it. But that's not the most disturbing part of all this. I live alone, and sometimes when I'm in bed and can't sleep, at midnight, I can still hear her screaming. Sometimes my doorbell rings in the middle of the night, but when I go check, there's never anybody there. I had a camera doorbell installed, but haven't caught anything on video. Sometimes I hear a weird knocking sound, like somebody is banging on wood. Stuff in my house seems to relocate itself, such as clothing, food, and tools. Sometimes my fridge door is open. Whenever I look at my kitchen door, it feels like something is watching me. My cat Robin seems to stare at nothing in corners, and sometimes even gets a big tail and starts hissing. My TV's doing this weird thing where it turns itself back on after I turn it off, and it's only when I take the plug out of the socket that it stays off. All of these things seem to only happen between midnight and 1:30. But the most horrible thing is that I can hear her screaming when it's silent. I called my doctor about this because I thought I was going insane. She referred me to a team of therapists. After countless hours of talks and sessions, they confirmed that I suffer from no form of delusion, hallucinations, psychosis, or any other mental illness that could cause me to experience all this. But I still do. She still screams at me. Last night, January 2nd, 2023, I heard her screaming and banging again. When I went to bed and shut the lights off, I kept having this feeling like someone was standing next to my bed, watching me. And so I decided today, January 3rd, that I should write down this experience and share it, in hopes that she may find some rest in the knowledge that she won't be forgotten. Since we never got a name, I simply call her the Screaming Woman. May she rest in peace. Hey guys and ladies, thanks for watching. Links to all my shit are down in the description. Which one of these stories was your favorite? Let me know in the comments. I need some interaction going on here because the more comments and likes, the better for the channel. And that's about it. Be good to animals, even people.